العلم أشراف مطلوب وطالبه لله أكرام من يمشي على قدمه. العلم نور مبين يستضيء به أهل السعادات والجهال في الظلم.
عين بدين. Example. عين بدين. A house for money. He owes me a ayn. He owes me a house or a car or a mobile, whatever. And then bidain. I take it with him from dain because I'm going to give you £20,000. The third is what? Dain fa'ain. Dain fa'ain. So he owes me a debt and then I take a what? An item. طيب. Then the Shaykh says, أو بدين نعم قبل تفرق أو صالح على منفعة. لكن that dain نعم دين بعين أو دين بدين. طيب, so that's the third one. الرابع أو دين بدين. دين بدين. He owes me a debt and then مثلا he owes me 10,000 debt. Then he says, I don't have 10,000 at the moment, £10,000, لكن I have dollars. I have dollars or riyals or any other currency. So I will give you that inshallah. It doesn't have to be the same amount. لكن he says I'll give you that. That is permissible. لكن the Shaykh says قبضه قبل التفرق. قبضه قبل التفرق. As long as he takes it before departing. Why does the Shaykh says قبضه قبل التفرق? If you know, put your hand up. قبضه قبل التفرق. He takes it before departing.
Is it because the currency value can change?
نعم, okay, currency value can change.
Is it part of خيار المجلس?
Yeah?
Is it خيار المجلس?
خيار المجلس لا. Not to do with خيار المجلس.
To do with riba?
To do with riba. طيب, what part of riba?
So because they're both cash currencies, they both have to be
أحسنت.
doing
طيب. Is that what you're going to say as well? Allahu A'lam. I'm joking. Just kidding. Yeah, same? Naam. Why? Because now currency is currency. What's been exchanged, what he owes me is what? Cash. What he's given me now is also cash. So it needs to be taqabud. There needs to be taqabud. There needs to be taqabud. So that is the fourth type. Daynun bidaynin. نعم إذا كان بتقابض. طيب, الخامس أو صالحه على منفعة في عقاره أو غيره معلومة أو غيره أو في غيره معلومة. طيب, الخامس دين منفعة بمنفعة. إذا كان عليه دين كألف صالحه على. طيب, دين بمنفعة. He owes me a دين لكن he says I'm going to pay it off with a منفعة. I don't have the money. مثلا الآن سليمان owes me £20,000. £20,000. طيب, that is a debt that he owes me, صح? طيب. Now he's not going to give me a ayn and he's not going to give me cash. لكن he's going to give me a manfa'a, some sort of benefit which allows me to take back my haqq, my right. So he says, listen, I don't have the 20,000 that you want now. However, there's a house I usually rent out. You can stay in this house for 2 years. The rent of this house for 2 years would have been 20,000, 10,000 a year. So because I don't have your cash, you can stay in this house for 2 years rent-free. Well, it's not rent-free technically, but you don't have to pay me any rent until the 20,000 is paid in full. Is that understood? That is a manfa'a. Or he says, مثلا he owes me a slightly small amount, £1,000. And he says, listen, I don't have £1,000 now, lakin keep my car for 2-3 months. Keep it for 3 months, مثلا. And use the manfa'a, use the benefit that you would take from driving. Or in the previous example, the manfa'a of living in a sukna, living in the sukna dar, yani living in that property. طيب, you accept. By you living in that property, are you taking cash? Are you taking your £20 cash? La. You're taking it, how? you're reaping some sort of benefit from him, صح? And that benefit will equal up to however much it was that you owed. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 20,000. He can say, live there for 3 years, which would be more than 20,000. Lakin, that is the whole point of sulh. It is something that you agree upon, and it, as long as both parties are happy. Is that understood? طيب. السادس, the sixth type is عين بمنفعة. عين بمنفعة. طيب مثلا عين بمنفعة. مثلا he owes me a mobile phone. He broke my mobile phone and he needs to now give me back a mobile phone. Lakin he says to me, listen, I don't have your mobile phone, lakin I'll clean your car for the next 10 years. Or I'll clean your car for the next 5 years. On a weekly basis. Or 2 times a week. Is that permissible? Huh? Why is that permissible? He's given me a manfa'a, a benefit. He's giving me a benefit. He owes me a what? A ayn. What is the ayn here? The phone. صح? He owes me a ayn. And I'm taking back a benefit. Or مثلا he says, take my car, keep it for 3 months or 4 months. طيب, is that understood? Keep it for 4 months. Or I have a laptop that is worth way more than your phone, like you can use it for this year, in your first year of uni, use it for all of your assignments and so on, you can keep it for the first year of uni. That is a what? A manfa'a. That is a manfa'a. طيب. السابع, the seventh type, منفعة بمنفعة, a benefit for a benefit. Who can give me an example? منفعة for منفعة. Huh? Excellent. What was he going to say?
I was going to say like a service.
نعم, a service, صح. مثلا you agreed with a teacher to teach you, I don't know, Arabic. طيب. And you've already paid for your whatever it was that you wanted, that مثلا 10 hours or whatever. 10 hours. You've paid those 10 hours. طيب. Like in the teacher, after taking the money, he disappears and he comes back a few weeks later. He owes you what? Is it a ayn that he owes you? He owes you a manfa'a, a benefit. He owes you a manfa'a. So now he needs to teach you that. طيب. Or even before, مثلا, or you agree with him to build you a house. A house. Or مثلا a jidar, a wall. And he says, طيب, I'm going to build it for you. Lakin, instead of building it, he says, I'm going to build it for you, but what are you going to pay me in return? La. The example is wrong. That example I mentioned is actually wrong. Because I paid something. Naam. That is, naam. مثلا, I say, I'm going to build you a house, and you build me something. I'm going to teach you this, as the sister said, and you teach me this. Manfa'a bimanfa'a. Manfa'a bimanfa'a. I'm going to teach you 20 hours of Arabic, and you teach me 20 hours of English. Manfa'a bimanfa'a. That is also something we can come to a conclusion. A sulh. That is something we can come to a sulh over. How many is that? طيب. إذا كان عليه منفعة كبناء فصلها على ساق شجر. Or even the example that I mentioned earlier on, where he owes me what? 10,000. He owes me 10 hours of teaching time. He says, listen, I'm not going to teach you Arabic, like I'm going to clean your car for you. He's going to give me a manfa'a back. He can give me a manfa'a back. طيب, that's 7 types. أو صالح على دين مؤجل ببعضه حالا. أو صالح, this is another mas'ala. So where it says أو صالح, put a line around it, or bullet point it. أو صالح عن دين مؤجل ببعضه حالا. طيب, he owes him a debt. مثلا, I owe Ali 100,000. أو صالح عن دين, that is a dain that I now owe him, which is mu'ajjal. Lakin I say that dain, he's meant to pay me back in 6 months. He owes me 100,000 and he's meant to pay that back when? 6 months. بِبَعْضِهِ حَالًا. Lakin we agree for him to pay back some of that حَالًا, now. We agree with him, I agree with him, to pay back that amount now and get rid of the 6 months. مثلا, he owes me 100,000. And I say, if you pay me now, just pay me now, pay me 80,000 now. That is a sulh that we come to. Is that permissible? Huh? Bear in mind there's cash involved. طيب, sisters. مثلا, الآن Ali owes me £100,000. Ali says he's going to pay me this 100,000 in 6 months. طيب. I see him a month later. I want him to pay me, or he wants to pay me part of that money 6 months later, or part of that money now. Instead of paying me 6 months, instead of paying me 100,000 6 months later, he pays me, مثلا, we agree upon him paying me 80,000 or 60,000 now, there and then. What's the ruling? In the same majlis, as long as it is in the same majlis. ضع وتعجل. نعم. ضع وتعجل. Where did we study that?
You briefly mentioned it.
No, not briefly. I mentioned it in detail. Huh?
Put on the board, but as an attachment to something that you
Something else. لا, مزابنة, it wasn't. Huh? لا, it was in the matan. It was qagd. We studied qagd, صح? That loaning. Did we not study that? Huh? قagd. دع وتعجل. What was the ruling of دع وتعجل? Jaiz. Although a lot of the fuqaha, probably the Jumhur, I believe, will say it's not permissible. Why? Because it resembles riba. Because I am buying time for a certain amount of money. I am buying time, or that 5 months that I've taken off, I am now, that 5 months is worth the 20,000, for example, if I agreed with him to chop off 20,000. It was 100,000, and I said, what? Pay me 80,000, and that's it, we call it a day. So they're saying that 5 months early is equal to the 20 months. So there's time for money. So that's why they say it resembles riba. Again, a lot of the scholars say it doesn't resemble riba. Even Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi, he actually debates that issue. He goes, it's the opposite to riba. You're doing ihsan for this person. You're doing goodness for them. Also, both parties benefit. Why? Because he owes me 100,000. Like, when is he going to give it back? 6 months. If he gives me 80 grand now, then alhamdulillah, I've got 80 grand to spend now. Also, I don't know if he was going to give it to me in 6 months anyway. And he may not have that money in 6 months' time, and he's obviously saving 20,000. So there's a benefit in it for me and benefit in it for him. So that is also permissible. So صالح عن دين مؤجل ببعضه حالا, that is what they call ضع وتعجل, and that is permissible. أو كان له عليه دين لا يعلمان قدره فصالحه على شيء صح ذلك. Or if there's a dain upon, someone owes me cash, someone owes me money, like I don't know how much he owes me and he doesn't know how much he owes me. Is that possible? Give me a surah. How can that be? You owe me money, I don't know how much it is, you don't know how much it is. How is that possible?
1 year ago you didn't mention money, now I forgot how much it was.
1 year ago you didn't mention the money.
If there's a contract written up and then somehow the contract gets lost.
The contract gets lost, the receipt gets lost, or you've got a hisab, an account with this person. For example, the local shop. مثلا, you've got an agreement with him, he's your friend, you've got an agreement with him that when you go there, you don't pay all the time. Like you pay at the end of the month. So he writes down what you've taken. So due to bad bookkeeping, or I don't know, the safe, or there's the receipts being lost, the flooding taking place, whatever happening, whatever, there's no bookkeeping of how much you've actually taken. But you know there's a debt somehow, somewhere. The Shaykh says, فَصَالَحَهُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ, and then they agree upon something. صَحَّ ذَلِكَ, then that is permissible. That is permissible, and it is sahih, meaning it is sound, and it is binding. Mathalan, he says, listen, for the last month I've been coming here as normal, as usual. Usually I take about 300 to 350 pounds. That's how much my groceries would normally be. So let's just call it 340 for this month, or 330. That is permissible. That is permissible. طيب. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said, وقال لا يمنع جار جاره أن يغرز خشبه في جداره. The Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said, let not a jar, a neighbor, prevent his neighbor from placing a wooden peg or placing a wall upon his wall. Suratul Mas'ala, two people, they live next to one another. طيب. Now this person's house is already built. This person's house is already built. This other person wants to build a house. So instead of making a brand new wall, he connects it to what? To the wall of his neighbor. That can be a surah. Or, مثلا, a neighbor wants to put up a canopy. And instead of making a new wall to hold up the canopy, he uses the wall of his what? The wall of his neighbor. The Messenger ﷺ is saying that the one that has already got his house, and he should not prevent his neighbor from using this. That's the Surah Al-Mas'ala. Is that understood? طيب. Lakin there's difference of opinion amongst Ahlul Sunnah, amongst the fuqaha. Lakin, if that wall or that wooden peg or whatever it is, that canopy, whatever it is that is being placed, if that is going to cause a harm, then cause a harm to the neighbor, then they are in agreement that it is not permissible for him to do so. Is that understood? Right. So the hadith says that you should not prevent your neighbor from using or taking advantage of the wall that you've already got placed. Sah? Right. So based on that, it would mean that under no circumstances it is not permissible for me to what? To say no. Lakin there are situations that I can say no. So when you look at the mas'ala, first and foremost, if that building of a wall or that extension is going to cause a harm to the neighbor's home or to the neighbor's building structure, then it is not permissible. I don't have to allow him. I don't have to allow him. Is that understood? Secondly, if he doesn't need to use my wall, meaning if he can actually suffice with his part of the wall or his side of the house, and he doesn't need to use my side, and there's no need there, likewise, I am allowed to say no. I am allowed to refuse. Are these two situations understood? If you haven't understood, ask me to repeat and I will repeat. So there has to be a need for him. And there has to be no harm that comes to me. There can be no harm that comes to me by way of him using my side of the wall. Hassan. طيب. The hadith says, the Messenger ﷺ says, Muhammad, read the text, the hadith, the last hadith in Bab al-Sulh.
The Prophet ﷺ said, none of you should refuse to let his neighbor fix a piece of wood to his wall.
None of you should refuse to let his neighbor use a what? A piece of wood. Attach a piece of wood, طيب. To fix a piece of wood. That is general, not just piece of wood, like in anything that your neighbor may need your help with, طيب, or your side of the house with. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is prohibiting us from doing so. صح؟ طيب. So when we're talking about tahrir mahal al-niza', when we're talking about when it's allowed and when I can refuse and when I can't refuse, there are three scenarios. The first is if by my neighbor placing or using my wall or attaching something to my wall, it will cause me harm. If that's the case, then I don't have to apply by this hadith. I can say no. I don't have to agree. And it won't be me opposing the hadith. I won't be opposing the hadith. Due to other evidences, la darra wa la dirra, there's no harming or causing of harm. Is that understood? The second scenario is if this person, if my neighbor doesn't actually need to use my side of the wall, or to use my side or the other side of my wall. There's no need there. There's no hajjah. He can suffice with his wall, or he can just use a temporary stand-up or whatever it could be. There's no need for my specific side of the wall. In that case, I can also refuse. Why? Because he doesn't need it, and it may cause me harm. And even if it doesn't cause me harm, it is not something that he needs. So it is not as if I am not fulfilling the rights of the neighbor. So it is not a must. I can refuse. Are these two situations understood? طيب. Like the scholars differ over if it doesn't cause me any harm and he also needs it, is it wajib for me to accept it or not? Is it wajib for me to accept it or not? Some of the scholars say, na'am, it is wajib, based on this hadith where the Messenger ﷺ said, do not refuse. And some of them say, la, it is not wajib, because the Messenger ﷺ said, لا يحل مال مسلم إلا بطيب من نفسه أو بطيب منه. Or كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, it is not permissible to use the wealth of another Muslim except if he's pleased with it. So looking at all the other general texts in the Quran and the Sunnah, they say it is not permissible. إن دماءكم وأموالكم حرام عليكم. The Messenger ﷺ said, your dima, your blood and your wealth is haram upon you. So that is a mas'ala that the scholars mention along with this hadith. Is that understood? It doesn't have to fall under any of these, because sulh, remember I said it was very broad, it was general. Anything can be sulh. We can have an agreement over anything. Sulh al-jar, for example. Like we can call it sulh al-jar. Lakin, there's nothing that prevents me from, or afwan. This can be called sulh between neighbors. Lakin, the reason why the scholars mention this is not to say that this has a direct connection with Kitab al-Sulh or Bab al-Sulh. So your question can be, where is the connection between the hadith and Bab al-Sulh? Now the connection between the Bab al-Sulh is often neighbors are the closest people to one another. Sometimes they're closer to one another than their family members, because they're family members, they may see them once a year or once every few months. Like in their neighbors, they see them what? Every day. So it's important to have a good relationship and a good connection with a good relationship and a healthy relationship with your neighbor. And at times there can arise disputes. At times there can be disputes. So should a dispute arise over you using my wall or not using my wall, what can be used as a criterion or as a sulh or as a judgment? This hadith can be applied. This hadith can be applied. And a lot of the fuqaha, or the majority of the fuqaha, they place this hadith in Bab al-Sulh, because it is a relationship between two people, and this specific situation or this scenario can cause a dispute. Is that understood? طيب. باب الوكالة. طيب. باب الوكالة. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, the next one, next chapter, الوكالة. باب الوكالة. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يوكل في حوائجه الخاصة وحوائج المسلمين المتعلقة به، فهي عقد جائز من الطرفين. طيب. we're going to study this next week. Like, invite these titles, inshallah, and these are the titles that we're going to study next week. Number 1, Ta'rif al-Wakala. So these, we're going to study these next week. Like, write it down as they are. Ta'rif al-Wakala, the definition of Wakala. Mashru'iyatuha, the evidence for Wakala from the Quran and the Sunnah. The hukum of Wakala. The ruling of Wakala. And before we move on, Wakala means an agency or representative. We studied it, I think, we mentioned it somewhere in the last couple of lessons. Huh? No, dropshipping, there was somewhere else. La, mulk. Mulk. When we were talking about mulk, 4 types of mulk. And there were 4 types. One of them is the wakil. So wakil is when you use someone or allocate someone to be a representative, مثلا, to go and do business on your behalf. So the third thing is what? حكمها or حكم الوكالة. Fourth, ما تصح فيه الوكالة وما لا. ما تصح فيه الوكالة وما لا. What does it mean? وما لا. وما لا تصح. You find that in the books of the fuqaha. ما يصح فيه كذا وما لا. Instead of saying it again, they say وما لا. So what is it? ما تصح فيه الوكالة. What can wakala be done with? And what can be used as wakala? When can you use someone as a representative and when can you not? Number 5, تصرف الوكيل. The dealings of the wakil. What is he allowed to do? طيب, you've said you're a wakil for me, like, what is he allowed to do? For example, if you allow him, if you say, listen, you're the wakil of my daughter, marry her off to fulan. He can only what? Attend, and he can be her wakil and marry her off to what? That person. He can't now turn around and marry her to himself or to someone else. Is that understood? So that's what we're going to talk about in that. نعم. أخذ المال على الوكالة. Number 6, أخذ المال على الوكالة. Is it permissible for me to take a certain amount of money to be your representative? They call it ja'ala. And the last one is حكم الوكيل, the ruling of the wakil when it comes to daman. Is he liable for it or not? Is he liable for the wakala or not? So inshallah, hopefully. And these masail, they're actually mentioned in the matan. So if you go through the matan, you'll find them. You'll find the answers to them. And obviously, inshallah. طيب.